Welcome to Make That Paper, the show where we talk about all the crazy jobs we do to make the cash we need to pursue our artistic dreams.
And to hire someone to do your social media for you, because who has the time?
Today, we are chatting about the horse training trade and the military mission, plus the Department of Corrections profession.
But why stop there? We should delve into the Juvie Boot Camp Calling and Legal Practitioner Employ.
We are your hosts, Jaime Parker Stickle
and Jason Bieber.
And today we're having a conversation with an incredible writer whose many careers have inspired the profoundly moving stories she weaves.
She has been nominated for multiple awards for her novels Fit for Duty, Don't Tell, and Shades of Grey.
She's a good friend of the show, and we are absolutely delighted to be speaking to her. So please welcome Kathy Kron.
Yes.
Yeah, nice to see you guys. Thank you so much for having me today.
So interesting. Kathy's different because Kathy actually wanted all these careers she chose. And then at the same time, she was like, oh, I have a lot of stories. I should write a book, which is really interesting. And you said something interesting to us where somebody told you that you can't write a book until you've lived a life. So you don't have any experience. So once you get experience, and you can tell me what they were referring to and how you interpreted that information, because you sort of took it and ran with it in a direction that that exhausts me. Let's be honest. And I've worked a lot of jobs. I've worked 80 hours a week, but your career path
let's clarify. You've worked a lot of jobs. Kathy has worked a lot of careers.
Exactly.
Well, I've worked a lot of jobs, and I've worked 80 to 100 hours a week, but I've remade myself in careers, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. Like total remake, but I had to do the past one while I was working on the next one. So it was, like the total remake from counselor to attorney. There's a bridge in there where you're doing all those other jobs at the same time, or, so there definitely been quite a few careers in there. But a lot of jobs, and people are like, how do you work so many jobs? Well, 2 at once, 2 full-time ones at once, and
right, exactly.
Or school and a full-time, and they're, it's like, you just do it. You just can.
Somebody wrote on Twitter the other day that they had so many jobs that they were like, when I get bored or have no work for the one job, I just move over to the other job. And I just thought, God, I have never had a job where I just punched out at the end and that was it for my day. Like, you're the same. It's like, no, your whole career has always been leave one to go work on the other.
That's true. But, the jobs in, we'll call it quote unquote olden days, when you left work, like that job was done for that day. And there was somebody to plug and play into your job at that point.
Sure.
Right. And now you never leave work because there is no one else to do your job. It's just you.
It's just you.
So, and that's okay. And, you were talking about the list of jobs. So I've had a lot of government jobs, state and federal and military. And you got to have background checks.
Mm-hmm.
And so they want to know, where did you live and what jobs did you work in these certain years, right? So I actually I don't need it anymore, had a Word spreadsheet. Like I had this whole list because I had no idea. And it was like pages long, Well, I remember when I lived at this house, I must have been doing this job. It was in this state. It was crazy. I had to write it down because you couldn't just recreate it on a dime. You just couldn't do it. So it was crazy.
This is interesting to me. And this brings up an interesting problem that I have. Because I've moved so many times within California. Once I left Detroit, in California, I moved a lot in Los Angeles. That's a normal thing when you're a renter here. But I have also had a lot of jobs that I picked up off of Craigslist and, other whatever places. We won't talk about it, but I've had a lot of jobs too. So
it sounds like there's jobs that are shadier than Craigslist.
Some of them are shady, but there's this thing where you're applying for a new student loan or I don't know, there's some things where I need like for social security or driver's license. I don't know, anything government related. And they're like, where did you live on April 15th in 1999? Or where did you live in 2001, February? Does this address look familiar? And I'm like, sort of, but I've also lived in a lot of places. So I can't remember. What was your salary at this point? $0 a year. I have no idea. And they want those specifics. And I'm like, I'm going to have to do a better job of my history. This is insane.
You have to make that list. That's
You
what
do.
you need.
I didn't
You need
know
that
I
list,
needed
and then
a
you can
list.
just refer back to it and be like, yeah.
That's
Yeah, the resume
insane.
won't do it. You need the actual physical location.
Employment
And then-
history and residency matrix.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All because of identity thieves. Identity thieves did this to us. God damn it.
Yeah.
I hate them. That's probably a really good job that I haven't explored. Identity thief.
Well, Kathy, I'd like to, yeah, let's not. I'd like to, rather than opening up and start a life of crime, maybe go back and talk about your beginnings. And I'm assuming that these are chronological. So I think I'm starting at the beginning. When you say you started out training horses.
Okay, so my parents moved me from the small town to the smaller town where I would say, and Charlie's gonna scratch, just so you know. So that I went to school with at the time, which are still the farmers, right? So I'm in the school district, which is the town I live in now, which is a whole full circle, where you had your advanced classes and your languages and all this, and you're in like, they moved all the time anyway, and in 7th grade, and then you went to live with the farmers, and you couldn't take those classes because they didn't exist in that school. And we were out in the country, and there was this horse farm nearby, this little barn, and these horses about a mile away from where I lived, which not all the roads were paved, let's say. And there were no sidewalks. Actually, there's no sidewalks where I live now. So anyway, so I started taking care of the horses in this barn in exchange for a horse that I ended up getting. My parents did not foot the bill for any of this, or
Amazing.
they did not approve of any of this. So I would feed these horses and take care of them and all that, and clean up the barn in exchange for my horses' room and board. And I would give riding lessons, beginner lessons at this horse farm, like a few miles away, like the good place, in exchange for my advanced lessons. And I would bale the hay and do all these things, and that would pay for my my tack and all the things that I needed, or entry fees for shows, or I did pony club, I did 3-day eventing, jumping, and all that that was like my thing. So basically, when people go to school in the morning, you go from your house and you go to school, right? Not me. I went to the barn first. And when you come home from school, you don't come home, you go to the barn, and that's just, so that's how the horse thing came about. And back in those days in the school that I ended up graduating from, my first rating was that I was, the school paper. So first the feature editor, then the editor-in-chief of the paper, which I totally forget about those things. But anyway, so these people, when I started going to college, and I was like, oh, I'm going to write this novel, and I was calling it Bank Jump, and I started this book because, it was all about horses, and I trained horses on the main line after college, and, did all these things. And they're like, well, how are you going to write a book? You're like, 17 years old and you haven't done anything. And I'm thinking, oh, that's a really good point. Well, meanwhile, I had already done, ROTC, and, so I had done some things, but I started keeping, actually physically, now I have a notebook from when I was in training in the military that I actually took notes about what happened during the day. And that was a good background basis for the Don't Tell book, because those were the things that happened, and I made the notes, and, in real time, in less than favorable conditions. So yeah, I actually had a guy at Lewisburg Federal Prison. I did an internship. I've worked at state and federal prisons, adult and minors and juvenile things. But anyway, I had a guy at the federal prison. It's not a very nice place in Lewisburg. Say, the only reason you came here was so you could add to all the places that you've been, so you can write your stories or something. And I was like, wow, okay, well, maybe I will write more down then. You know, he was not a very nice gentleman. But I really didn't enjoy the time there anyway, so that was okay with me. It didn't lead to any firing. I was doing an internship in their legal department for like 5 months, but yeah, he didn't want me to actually work there. He thought I would quit so I could go off and chase another story. And I was like, that's okay. So that's a scary place. Yeah, it's real jail.
Interesting to me that all these things led to you to writing fiction stories, and so much of it always, when I talk with you, it's like, I can't believe that you didn't become a journalist after all of this. Like that journalism wasn't something that you also kind of switched gears into.
I think I had that idea, but journalism is talking about other people doing these things, and I more like to put myself in the story. So all my settings I try to make as authentic as possible.
Yeah.
And then I just add the people and I see in my head as opposed to the real people who are there. So, you know, reporting on real life things, you're going to see that over and over in the media and whatever. Nothing wrong with journalism. And I thought I was headed there for a while, but I liked thinking about who were these soldiers, who were these people, the people that I'd met. I would take those people and I would either put them in or I would modify what happened, or I would collapse. A lot of times what I did was collapse the timeline of the things that I've seen. Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you, you went to college, you were invested in horses, you were writing about horses. How did you end up in the military?
Well, no, I was in ROTC in college.
Okay.
So in college, I didn't ride very much. And then it was after college that I didn't really want, so I was doing the military stuff after college. And there was a point where I had gotten hurt and I couldn't stay in the military at that point, which I am not that bright. So I found a way to get back in. Took me a little while, but you know, to get over that and get back in. So when I could no longer be on active duty at that point, I went back to the horse farms and kind of worked my way. I had actually gotten hurt to the point where I couldn't walk. Like the injuries on my one leg, I couldn't physically lift my leg to walk. Like it wasn't even that it hurt too much. It just didn't work. Injuries to my hip and my knee and stuff. And so it was beyond like, oh, you have oh, you're hurt and you can't do something. No, I was pretty good at taping it up and wrapping it. That was a completely different and very frightening thing that you weren't sure. And they didn't have enough good imaging technology. Like they only actually got a complete overview of what that injury was in 2015. And this happened in 1987. So
may I ask how you were injured?
I was, okay, have you ever seen in the TV shows where you have the huge obstacle course and they're up on the big logs and you know what I mean?
100%.
Sure.
Imagine.
Sure. I like Wipeout.
Yeah. Okay. So add a little bit of winter, really cold, and some ice.
Oh.
And you're up on the top and you couldn't hold on because there was ice. And so it was a very long fall down. It was one of those big old thuds, like you're falling off a building, except it was a log. So you were climbing on this thing and it was bam.
Oh.
So yeah, it was pretty, yeah.
Can I just
So that got my whole one side, my neck and my whole one side, shoulder, knee and hip, just, but you know, it's,
did you cry?
No, I don't think so. I think I was stunned and it was really cold and we had not had heat for weeks and I am not a cold weather person.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was
living in the East Coast right now.
Yeah, I know. This was in the East Coast. This was, and so it was just like, it was so cold. But no, I didn't leave that training class. I was like, we're going to work on this. And it got, and so I kind of had done the things I needed to graduate from that. And then I went on to the Aviation Center at Fort Rucker And then I just kind of had to work my way through that. I made it all the way to Fort Carson before it was like, you can't run. I started to be able to walk, but not very well. And, you know, and they're like, well, you kind of have to run. And so, you know, I actually did work my way back into that, but only I stayed on the reserve side because that constant pounding and the carrying of the weight would just trigger everything all over. So to this day, it's still an issue. Like, it never really went away. I just found other ways to deal with it, which is fine. But, you know, that's what happens. And like so many people in the military, and then of course you have injuries on top of your injuries because you're working with injuries and you have more injuries. I'm actually at 100% for the VA service connected disabled because of so many things, spin-off things, you know, that have happened. But like everybody else that I've ever talked to who's been hurt, everyone says, I'd go back and do it again, you know? There's somebody who lost their vision or their leg or their this or that. They're like, yep, I'd go back and do it again. If I could get back in uniform and go, I'd be there. And that's exactly like, it's a thing. So
what is that? I mean, you're a psychologist also. You're trained in counseling. What is that?
There's a certain sense of belonging and being and duty. You can't replace it somewhere else. So like, for example, when I was in law school, I went to Paris to study for I took like my last several months. I was studying international law. So I went to this program through Tulane, was visiting like I did in Germany or in Paris. And then I had some friends who were in Germany, civil engineers who worked for the US and in Heidelberg. And so here's the sense where I'd been living like just in Paris and there's no military, no US. I wanted to go somewhere where I knew nobody and nobody spoke English. It was perfect. It was awesome. I mean, and so then I went to Germany, some friends of mine and we went over on the train and then I ended up staying in Germany. Well, there's a military base there. So pretty much what I did, I was still in the reserves, right? I walk up into the JAG office and I'm like, hey, I don't have any uniforms, but if you want some free help, here I am. Oh, by that night, I was invited to barbecues and PT is now. And yeah, you can come and work on criminal post-trial stuff. I had this immediate group, like I was just immediately accepted and everybody was so nice and inviting me to everything. And it was just like a world you can't understand just because, you know, I wasn't even wearing a uniform because you had that same, you know, you were one of them. So, which is.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
Can I ask you, and you, I know you talk about this or you explore this in your books, but there was, you know, an aspect of it because you talk about this sense of belonging.
Yep.
So much so that even when you're not actually in, you're still in. But also, there was also a sense of exclusion, a sense of, I'm talking about don't ask, don't tell. And
which you explore in your books also.
Yeah. And I'm wondering how that, like, what is the draw, or, you know, especially at that moment when you're injured and you're out, but you feel that, you know, you still feel that draw pulling you back in, even though you're both physically out and socially having that. Well, I don't know. It's both social and institutional. So anyway, I don't know if I have.
The question is.
Yeah.
I got it.
Still felt more belonging than not. So like, how did you manage that for so long?
Well, okay. So most people who leave the military have a huge, unless they tried to get out, they have an identity crisis. And a lot of them try to fill it with a government job that has a similar structure, right? They have the ranks, they have the jobs, they have the whole kind of thing and that purpose, and you're doing things like, and I'll get back, Jason, to that, but how many people do you personally know that can go to work in a tank and come home in a helicopter in the same day, and then go back to your house and in your normal bed, right?
Yeah.
Is that cool? It's pretty cool, right?
Pretty
Just
cool.
the concept of it. And nobody's shooting at you, by the way.
Right.
Thank goodness.
This is like my job when I worked at the military academy in Colorado, that, you know, you got to, I mean, my friend would yell at me, "What are you doing in that Humvee ambulance?" Well, I'm getting checked out on it so I can add it to my license, my driver's license. She's like, "You don't need to be able to drive everything that comes in." I was like, "Oh, I want to drive this 113 track vehicle." And then she gave up and she's like, "Fine, just go out and get qualified," right? So we had all kinds of equipment and things and all kinds of training stuff. And I was like the training person as my regular job. And then, you know, and then you had, it would be like a government job, but it looked like a regular job. You wore a uniform, blah, blah, blah. But then I was really only in the National Guard there. And so I had to do the weekend drills, but you would have your weekday job, which looked like you were active duty, but was totally different, you know, but it was cool. And you got to do all this stuff. So there was this, there are things that you just can't do in the civilian world that you're allowed to do there. Like you're driving down the airfield road and the sun's coming up and you just see the helicopters taking off. And it's a scene from a movie, but it's real and you're living it and you're about to go there and you're about to go through all these checkpoints that you're like, "Hey, how's it going this morning?" that nobody else can get in because they don't have your job, right?
Yeah.
So then there's the other side of it, which is way before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, you know, because that wasn't until 93. So then there's all of us who are like, we had to lie and say we weren't gay, right? And and they would ask you and they would say and they would threaten you and they would remind you and they were like, you know, this is bad juju and you can't do it and you can't be gay. It's and there's an actual, I looked up the actual regulation, you know, and it's like homosexuality is incompatible with military service. All right, then you don't even know who we are. You know, how do you know that? Because somebody wrote it down. And
And when was that written? I mean, was that written for men?
No,
That was
just in
written
general.
just in general, but like at one point it was only men in our military for the longest time. So I wonder when that was written and when that was established.
They were nice enough to rewrite it over time. I think the last rewrite was like 1953 or something, like World War II. I can't remember. I looked it up at one point. But yeah, so this whole thing was, the irony was that you're like, "Nope, I'm not." Put your hand up, you go do your thing. And then there's gaydar involved, right? And
That's
so
the official term. That is the
gaydar, right?
official
And
term.
right, and you have to be gay to have gaydar. And I mean,
Did you get trained on that equipment, or did they give you? Did you get license for that equipment as well?
No, actually, that article that I just wrote for GirlX was the first time that I was part of the gay community. Like I live in, you know, here, or lived here and then school, and so when I went to my permanent duty station and I got picked up for real, it was like a whole new world. And I'm like, "Oh, gay bars? No idea. This is so cool." You know, and now I'm like, "Oh, now it makes sense how you people, I'm like drawn to you," you know, and it was just really weird. But, you know, you're sitting in a room full of people that you're not allowed to be gay with. And yet you can tell who the gay people are and have a nonverbal conversation, but you have to have the nerve to say something to them about it or some way indicate, so that you don't get thrown out. Because if you say something like, "Hey, you're gay, do you want to go to this bar?" What do you do? So this term family, I know, came into being some time ago. So it'd be like, "Hey, are you family?" Well, if you weren't family, you didn't know what that meant, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So you use family a lot. But then you also see these people, like if you get into the first cool place for gay people, which is always a really bad neighborhood, and you're sure you're going to get mugged till you get out. Even if you weren't gay, you get mugged there. You know, so you go in there and then you'd see some of those people in other places that you would go. back when we went places, like the cool drag shows and the outdoor dancing and the indoor bar, and a lot of alcohol involved. But anyway, it was still fun. But even the military people, they were going there, and there were people who worked in missile silos in Wyoming who would come down to our bar in Denver, because that was the closest civilization, 3 hours away, right?
Wow.
On the weekends. And so you'd meet all kinds of cool people in the bar, and you could tell who was military and who wasn't. And it was just very, very interesting. So, and we had the Air Force Academy there, and a bunch of Army bases around in Lowry, which is no longer, I mean, it was this melting pot, and lots and lots of gay people in the military, probably more women than men, I would think. But yeah.
Must have been very stressful to not to worry about being found out.
Yeah, there's just a point where you're like, well, but then we had Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Well, that was really helpful. The only thing that stopped was nobody physically hunted us. Like, it was no longer somebody's job. Mm-hmm. But you were just I call it a glass closet. You're like, well, we still can't look gay, and we can't say we're gay, and we can't, so it really was like, just stop people from hunting us. But yeah, I mean, I don't know that it was stressful. I found it annoying at times. Other times we're like, how stupid are these people? I am a poster child for the gay community. Do you not see me? And it was just like, what are you going to do? So other people were like, oh, you're a woman having a men's job. And I'm like, no, I'm a gay person who isn't supposed to be here. But, who cares if it's men and women's job? That's not a problem. You guys are way off base. Right. But we didn't know any better. All we knew was this is the rule, and this is what you do if you want to keep doing what you're doing. And we couldn't change it. And so we just did what we did. And sometimes we laughed about it, and sometimes we were mad. But more so, we were mad at the people who wanted to get out, who used that as an excuse, because you'd be out processed in a matter of hours. They strip that sticker off your car, and they get rid of you quicker than anything.
Wow.
It was an easy out, which was not cool. So
that's incredible.
Yeah.
And so you're taking notes on all of this, and you're putting this together. I mean, the story is coming together as you live it. The stories you wrote are fiction,
yes.
Or are
Yes.
you and I don't know if they're fictionalized accounts or if they're pure fiction, but are you like creating stories? Are you actually writing at this time, or are you or is it just note taking at this point?
I didn't start just notes, and not all the notes, just certain things, and the rest of it stayed in your head that you would never ever get rid of it. But I think the notes were more on the feelings, how you felt when you're in this situation, how when you were out in the cold the same time right before I had fallen, how it was so cold and you were so dirty and you were so disgusted that you did take some shampoo out to the field with you, and I washed my hair and it froze in place, right? And that, things like that, you don't want to forget that, because how many times does that really happen to you, right? So most of the stuff, some of the things I imagine would happen to a person. Some of the things had happened to somebody that I'd known, but mostly it's totally fiction. I didn't actually start writing anything until my last semester of law school, when I came back from Europe. And I did a visiting semester here in Pennsylvania, and I had to commute an hour and 45 minutes each way, and they were dynamiting the road to make it passable, bigger, which made it impassable at times if you didn't hit it just right. So sometimes I never got there. And so I was writing a screenplay in my head, and I'd drive there and I'd write this whole work out these scenes. I'd get there, and as a good practice student that I was, I would write down the scenes like I was taking notes as they were talking, which is probably bad. But all of my grades were based on essays, so it didn't matter what the lectures, you know what I mean? So anyway, so I wrote a screenplay in that 5 months, driving back and forth to school. And then, I started then writing, realized I'm like, I'm in Pennsylvania. There's no like basic internet, or, I'm like, how am I ever gonna? And there was a pivotal point there in law school where it's like, do you want to go study in Paris? Or my two options in my mind, because, was to go to LA for the entertainment law. And those were the two paths. And I'm like, oh, which one would I regret? Right. And I'm like, and you know what I decided? If I was going to be part of entertainment, I didn't want to be the lawyer.
Yeah.
I wanted to be the creator. I always thought that I would be the stunt person in LA, not the writer. You know what I mean?
Broken leg and you're
well, no, I mean, I jumped horses. I used to jump motorcycles. I have a racing motorcycle. I had horses. It was definitely a little bit. I was definitely an adrenaline junkie, and now it's only a semi-reformed adrenaline junkie. It's just that rush that you get in your day. There's definitely, it's real. Yeah. It's a real thing. You don't get it so much here. You can try to recreate it, but maybe not. So the book I started writing again after I started working for this law firm, and I was like, oh, I felt like somebody killed me and put me in a box. So I started writing the first book, and the first book was actually Shades of Gray. And then my friend said, hey, no. She said, hey, we need a backstory on the Shades of Gray book. And I ended up writing the Don't Tell book, which ended up being put out first. Which is great. So that was my backstory, was a book. A little overkill, but that's the way it goes.
But you've published them all. And and it's so interesting because you're, but I haven't seen, well, okay, let me finish this thought. I have a lot to say. What's so interesting is it's very real. It's like you feel very much that it's happening to you at this time. It's very immersive. But
hey, can I say one thing? Don't lose your thought.
Yeah.
Somebody wrote a comment on Amazon with my first book, and she thought she was being terribly mean. And she's like, oh, she's a terrible writer. All she's doing is writing down the things that happened to her. But the book was totally fiction. So I was like, yay, because it's not real. And I made it all up. And she's like what you just said, totally immersed and thought it was real as she was going. And I just was writing down a journal. Yes. And that wasn't it.
Yeah. Which is great.
Sorry. Sucker.
Yeah. I was like, yay.
I think that's true. It's wonderful. And I think this is just side note, since we're here, a lot of reviewers of things, like the reviews are like, they do think that they're mean, and it's like, but actually that's what I was doing, and you got it. Just because you didn't like that I did that, you got that I did that, so I did it well. Thank you so much.
I know.
I see that a lot. I don't really read reviews. I don't write reviews. And I know that that's a big thing, is book reviews are a big thing for writers, but I just won't do them.
Also the problem with reviews on Amazon is you've got the same person reviewing your book, and then they're doing it right after they review a pair of pants and a blender and a Bluetooth headphones they bought, and it's like it's not a book marketplace the way it once was. It's an everything marketplace.
Yeah, I'm talking more about book critics and reviews, big reviews, and I'm like, oh, I could never be a book critic, because I just want to say yay for everyone who actually publishes a book. It's like, oh my God, you did it. I am so proud of you. I am working hard to do that too. And I'm so proud of you. But I will say this about Amazon reviewers. The biggest review I see on everything, books included, was it shipped from China? Did they print it in China? Is this from China? Don't buy it. It's from China. Like, that is the biggest review lately. Is like, if it's from China, it's no good. I'm like, you were really hurting some people's careers here. Can you just shh for 1 second?
Oh yeah, that's true. I haven't seen that. Now I'll have to look for it.
Yeah. Next book title, Made in the USA.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, yours kind of are made in the USA. You're talking about the American military. I mean,
Yeah,
more you
I
can
am.
say than that. Okay. So before you went to law school though, so you get out of school, you're doing active duty, and then you decide to go into counseling. So you go back to school for a degree in counseling.
No,
No.
I had
No.
my undergrad. I got 2 degrees as an undergrad in the 4
Okay.
years, one economics, one psychology.
Okay.
So you were doing double duty even then.
Apparently, yes. Yes.
Okay. So
Okay.
you're in active duty. When do you start? When does the career to counseling begin?
After I got hurt and had to get off of active duty during the period of time where I was trying to get back in, which is not very easy when you have what's called an RE3 code, which means you have a medical disability and they really don't want you back because you're hurt and you're broken. And so this happened in, like I said, about 1987. And so about 1988, then I started with the counseling stuff. And then eventually when I went back in the reserve side, I was doing the counseling stuff or army or full-time Army government service GS job while I was on the reserves or National Guard side then. But it took a couple of years to get back in the military. It took me, I think, if you get rejected, like they have a paper review, or if you can get there in person, you're rejected for 3 years. You can't reapply for 3 years to get back in.
So
if
what do
it's
you
a
do in
medical.
that time? Like
Well, no, I was, that's what I mean. I was doing counseling
Got
jobs.
it. Okay.
And because that's the degree I had. So actually I was supposed to, I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was Raymond James, because I had an economics degree. I had a license to be a stockbroker. And it's been so long. I was back and forth from Colorado and Pennsylvania so many times. I think I was going to Denver, and I could have been coming this way. Anyway, and in the drive, Black Monday, whatever that was in 87, it happened in my drive across the country. And by the time I got there was no stockbroker job because everything crashed. So that's when I ended up doing the counseling instead.
Got
So,
it.
which I like doing counseling. It's a good job for me because you can use humor and you can make a difference and you can see the difference happening. I like it.
Yeah, 100%.
But you also absorb all that. So
yeah, that's one reason I didn't, when I was deciding, am I going to go back to school and get a graduate degree in psychology, or am I going to go for writing? I had this decision to make because I think they go hand in hand. 2, I was like, I don't know if I can absorb anybody else's issues. Like, I've absorbed so many throughout my life that I'm like, I don't think I have the capacity to absorb anymore without it destroying
Making a podcast about it.
Making a podcast about it, writing a book about it. They aren't my stories. It would be pretty shitty. So yeah. So I was like, let's just write about this instead of actually putting it into practice at this point. But a lot of writers are lawyers and therapists. This is like, writing goes hand in hand with both of those professions. At what point did you decide, instead of writing, right now I'm going to go and get my law degree? What drove you to get a law degree?
Well, no, I always knew that I was going to go to law school, right?
Okay.
And it was the romantic notion of going to law school and studying in the stacks and doing all that stuff. And oh my God, it took me I had a 10-year break because I couldn't figure out what kind of law could I practice that I could live with myself, right?
Sure.
Because, and then my first semester of law school, I was like, oh my God, what have I done? This is awful. All you do is memorize this crap and spit it back out. And then you're already 30 grand into it. And you're like, well, I guess I'm going to keep going, and and it's totally disillusioning. And yeah, it's not ever something, once I had that, I'm like, well, oh no. So the writing part, here's the interesting part. I'm not sure I even remember taking any writing classes at all in undergrad. Nothing. I took none. I think there was a point when I couldn't do the things I wanted to do, that I started to write about the things instead.
Yeah.
Until I could get back to doing them, which, and then I'm like, oh, when I do this, I can make all kinds of stuff up. And then we got to the other series of books was set in Denver, and the Injustice series, and my friend and I wrote those. And so we'd write some stuff, and then I'd fly out to Denver, and then we would go to Panera, and we would sit there, and we'd like hash through this whole thing. And so we'd spend I'd spend like a week there, and then I'd come back, and then anyway, it was, but that was a fun time, because a lot of people that I knew, military or in the National Guard, their full-time jobs were really interesting. Like, okay, who gets to be me? Who gets off the plane in Denver, and your friend who is like second in command of the State Patrol, female, and she's like, hey, by the way, we're not going to the house first. We're going over to Adams County, because we're having a terrorist mock-up Homeland Security terrorist thing, and you're going to be one of the terrorists. So I hope you don't mind that I volunteered you. And it was like, huh. And she just threw me into it. I'm like, all right, then, it's that kind of stuff where you're just like, I'm pretty sure not ever, but I never thought about it, because my life was always like that. All those things that now people like you, your eyeballs pop out, and you're like, you what? And it's just normal for me, because of the people that I knew associated with, that they had these kind of secret squirrel jobs or state patrol jobs, or, Secret Service or whatever it was. You knew all these people because of the stuff you did, and you didn't think twice about it. You're just like, oh, what are you up to today in the missile silo? It's really boring there. Okay, well, whatever, or the guy who's like on the ship, which I call them boats. The Navy guys get mad when you do that, but the things that they do on there, and that's really fascinating. But now that you step back and everybody's like, no, not normal people don't do those things. It's not really how it works. Then it's kind of cool.
Well, I think it's interesting, because I've never lived in a place where there was a large military. Oh, no, I lie. I did for 6 months. But other than living in Oceanside for 6 months and living in an apartment complex that was very affordable and not great, but it was all the young military officers.
You want to know?
Yeah. And I had no idea. Because I had found that place in Michigan. I had gone into the grocery store, gotten one of those rental apartments things, called ahead, and then drove out. But other than that, small, and I went to work and then went home, because I didn't know anybody. So I never went out. So I never ran into the military at all, except I just heard them through the walls. But I've never lived in a place where there was a military presence, so like, even when I watch military shows, I'm flabbergasted at like that there's like, like a whole city that's all military, and it's crazy to me, because I've never had that experience. I don't even think, aside from my grandfathers, I don't even know anybody. And I don't even know anybody that's been in the military. Isn't that crazy?
And they are self-contained cities. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. You shut those gates, and you don't need to go anywhere.
That's
you can
wild.
Totally self-sustaining. Mm-hmm.
There's a whole economy there, and we go up to Joshua Tree a lot. There's a base out at 29 Palms, and just every now and then you're driving on this 2-lane highway, and the whole convoy of military vehicles comes through, and
our kid thinks it's a parade. He's like,
parade. Yeah, but I realized like a lot of this is just restocking, like life stuff, not necessarily military supplies. Just everyone on that base has to eat. Everyone needs clothes. Everyone needs stuff, pens and paper.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the the trucks that resupply that are civilian trucks. Like for the Army, it's AFES. I think they changed their designator recently, Army Air Force Exchange Service. But those are all civilian trucks, government trucks that come that don't look like military. They just come in regular old trucks. And then you always have your Burger King or whoever's allowed to be on that base where you're like, yep, I'm stopping there on the way through. I don't want to eat the crap they're serving. So, you get in that line and you go through and you do that. And, only so many of those kind of vendors are allowed on a base or a post or whatever too. So that's pretty interesting. I mean, there's and everything's free. Like you have a library, you have a theater, you have your post office and your bowling alley, and you have like a place where you can repair your car for free. You just have to sign up for everything and you can get all this kind of crazy stuff for free that you can't even imagine.
Really? Wow.
Yep.
Well, Kathy, I want to just thank you again. This has been so great talking to you about all of your experiences, all of your jobs, and it's exciting to hear the way that all of them are coming into your creative life again.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
This was so nice.
Much.
She showed on Monday, made love on Tuesday. By Wednesday she was down. We fought on Thursday, made up on Friday, but now I'm losing ground. You call me lazy, you think I'm crazy, so why'd you come around? She want my money, but I got no money. This ain't no savings and loan. So why'd you come around? She want my